How to heal the Horde. Interesting. Does the Horde need healing? I'm an Alliance player. I'm not sure how to heal the Horde. Thrall looks like he could be involved, of course. Let's see what Sixten has to say about how he would heal the Horde.
I know. A guy that looks like me talking about the Horde. But let's lower the pitchforks. It's getting a bit too blue around here. That's better. Hey, we're chilled out. There's an armistice and everything.
I love how he does these animations.
Whew. So for this episode, we're just going to chat everything Horde, because they've been in a bit of an interesting spot ever since Battle for Azeroth. Between a second siege of Orgrimmar and Alta F4ing the position of War Chief, today's Horde looks totally different than the roided up orcs of yesteryear. And through all these changes, I think we might have lost a bit of that characteristic edge that makes the Horde so appealing to the masses. But before we dig into that, let's review some of the history of the Horde and try to figure out what that core appeal even is. It all starts on an alien world called Draenor, where the Burning Legion just came up with the clever idea to gaslight some orcs into doing a war.
You're my wife? For real, though?
Yes, now...
The Burning Legion really did screw
And
the
after
orcs
swarming
over.
their own planet, it was time to get to the real matter at hand, attacking little old Azeroth and her human kingdoms. After building the Dark Portal, with the help of the corrupted Guardian Medivh, the Orcish Horde would attack Azeroth and kick off the Warcraft franchise. Man,
There it
Warcraft
is.
has been space magic fantasy stuff from the onset, huh?
Yeah, and it
This
was
is-
interesting that a lot of people hated space magic because, like he says, space magic, broken worlds out floating in space, coming through portals, green men invading an open, they're aliens. Orcs are aliens. The Orcish Horde invading Azeroth was an alien invasion, so it was kind of funny when everyone was hating on the whole thing. But I did understand that it got a bit too funky, especially when we went to Shadowlands. I think it was just so far removed from, an Elwyn forest with grass and trees and everything. It was just so high fantasy that it became a bit too high. You almost had to be high to understand what the hell was going on. So, but Blizzard at its core really is about, aliens invading.
This is going to kick off the first two Warcraft games, where the Alliance, not really the one we know yet, and the Horde, also not the one we know yet, would battle it out for Azeroth. Wait, no, the Eastern Kingdoms. But after those first two games, the Horde wouldn't be looking too great. You see, after the Second War, the Horde had essentially fallen apart. And with Draenor obliterated from Ner'zhul getting a bit spicy with the portals, the orcs had nowhere to go. But with them still very much being on Azeroth, they were now trapped in a world that saw them as evil invaders, which would see to it they pay for the sins of the past. Though at this point, some of the orcs stuck in the human internment camps weren't even alive during the war. They were paying the price of their parents' crimes. But hey, one of these orcs is
True.
broken free thanks to a human. His name's Thrall.
Thrall.
He's going to
Yeah.
run off and found a new Horde, one that is determined to find a place for his kind in a world they were stranded on. Along the way, he's going to befriend the Trolls and the Tarn, marking the start of the modern-day Horde. This is the core
The
of
OGs
the
of
foundation
the Horde. Yep.
They're a coalition of disparate tribes trying to carve out a peaceful existence for the people in a world dominated by the Alliance. From orcs to blood elves, every member of the Horde has been wronged by the Alliance. Well, except Darn. Those guys are just so...
Yeah, Tauren are peaceful people. But yeah, the Blood Elves are an interesting one because they were part of that Alliance domination, right? As the High Elves, they were part of the whole destroying of the Amani trolls and everything else. I mean, humans and High Elves together freaking genocided them, essentially. So there was a lot of collaboration between the two of them. In the end, they ended up joining the Horde, which really was a shifting in power, it felt like.
chill. No one has a problem with them.
It certainly caused a shifting in player numbers because a lot of players ended up playing Blood Elves.
It's here because they like the vibe. As put so well by Lorthamar after the Purge of Dalaran, the Horde exists because of the Alliance. Through thick and thin, the Horde sticks together. Because without the mutual aid of its members, they know the Alliance would pick them apart whenever they became an inconvenience.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, you might say the Horde has nothing to worry about. The Alliance are good guys. If anything, the Horde are the villains. And honestly, I get it. Another core part of the Horde, whether we recognize it or not, is that they appear quite villainous on a surface level. Between being the red side of red versus blue, the spiky buildings, and the monstrous members, any new player to the game is going to assume that this is the evil faction.
Yeah,
Before
I
they-
always thought that was one of the better things that World of Warcraft did, is they didn't really have an evil faction. There's always been kind of nuance to it. Now, the Horde have often been seen as the more barbaric side, right? But they're not necessarily the evil side. And when the movie was made, I remember in the first iteration of the Warcraft movie, they said they were going to tell it from an alliance perspective, which might have been the better way to do it. I don't know, but the whole way that story was told was kind of wishy-washy, back and forth too much. But they did want to show that the orcs were not bad guys. That was the main point of how they directed that movie, because in World of Warcraft, they're really not the bad guys. They were corrupted by demon blood, and they came out kind of crazy and barbaric early on. But at the end of the day, the Horde really they're not necessarily bad. They're just different than the Alliance for the most part. Gul'dan was bad. Yeah, Gul'dan was bad, but that doesn't make the Horde bad, because, I mean, Arthas was bad, but that didn't make the entire Alliance bad. They're definitely, both sides have contributed major villains to the storyline, that's for sure. But in terms of, which side is bad, which side is good, yeah, they both play their roles.
I know anything else about the
Volpera
Horde,
has the master
but this
race.
surface level reading of the Horde is also a cool part of their identity. Getting to overcome your initial impressions of the Horde as a player and come to understand them for what they really are is a large part of what makes the earliest lore so interesting. That's the twist of the first couple games. And man, does that twist always work wonders. Shoot, just look at Halo. It makes you like the aliens in the second game, and that leveled up the storytelling tenfold. But there's another
so
side
much
of
better
this
with the
coin.
Covenant.
Because this initial impression of the Horde continues to impact how characters and players view them. If you made a list of all the bad that the Horde Alliance has done, you'd find it's actually pretty easy to make a one-to-one list. I have to imagine Blizzard has done this on purpose over the years. However, unless you're a die-hard Horde stan, you'd probably hold the impression that the Horde is the one doing the most bad. This is because the core conceit of the two factions colors how we view their present actions. The Alliance is the good guys, with a few bad apples that stain their pristine legacy.
True.
While the Horde are the ones who are starting off as the bad guys that need to redeem themselves. The Alliance can walk off war crimes. We don't question whether or not the Alliance should continue to exist. Sometimes they have people go off the handle, but come on, they're the Alliance. We can't blame the whole thing for what a few maniacs do. Meanwhile, those ruffians on the Horde, every time something bad happens, everyone starts to question if all this Horde stuff is a bad idea. Between
Illidan and Sylvanas, well, Illidan and Sylvanas are very different, because Illidan's been redeemed. Illidan has been shown to be, we were wrong in thinking that he was the bad guy. Maybe some of the stuff he did was kind of questionable, but in the end, Illidan was just trying to defeat the Legion and save the world. Sylvanas, though, had a more selfish, route going about it. She trusted the jailer, which was the wrong thing to do. That showed through. She cared about breaking the chain, as she said many times, but that story was so badly told. We never found out if it was like she was trying to save the people, or whether she was just selfishly trying to break the chain because she didn't want to die. Sylvanas' story is completely scuffed, I'm not going to lie. It's a bad story as far as when it got into Shadowlands. Illidan's story is much better told in terms of his motivations, how we understood what he wanted to do. It was just way better. And unfortunately, I feel like that's a common theme between the Alliance and the Horde. A lot of Alliance stories are better told than Horde stories. And I don't know if that's because they're more relatable, because they look more like people. But there's something about it that, the best story on the Horde is probably Thrall. That's the best fleshed out story. The story of Thrall, which is why a lot of people like him. Well, lately, it's questionable, but it's better. Yeah, racist storytelling. It's just human nature. You just relate more to people that look like you. And if you're going to look at races between the Alliance and the Horde, well, the Alliance looks more like humans. I mean, there's literally humans on the Alliance than the Horde do. Yeah, human bias, kind of.
And Hell screams, both factions have their fair share of evils. But when one faction has been painted from the start as
Hellscream has a good story. Garrosh has a good story too, but his is a story of a bad guy, right? I mean, he never turns around and becomes good. There was inclinations of it. Remember when that one general, what was it? He killed innocents. You remember that whole thing where he killed women and children? Garrosh throws him off the bridge at Thunderbluff. But that was essentially retconned. Turns out that they were thinking about taking him down a good route, but then they changed their minds. So Garrosh kind of was more one-flavored and bad. He just wanted to be bad, and that was it. But his story is pretty good. And his story started and ended in World of Warcraft, actually.
Horde is the one that looks like they're the ones lying about their good intentions. And this also means they spend a lot of screen time apologizing for stuff. To be fair, I think this puts their writing in between a rock and a hard place. Because having this initial look of being the bad guys is a core tenet of the Horde. They just don't work as a faction unless that is part of their identity.
Yeah.
So, how do we move forward with the Horde? Well, I think they need to close themselves off a bit. While this does run counter to some of the greater themes of the last few years, I think in order to maintain the Horde in a post-BFA Azeroth, they need to act a little more standoffish. What do I mean by this? Well, now that the factions are appeased, we see them cooperate from time to time, like during the recent Gilneas reclamation. During this questline, we see Callie and Lillian, along with the player character of their Horde, help the Gilneans retake the city. While there's another conversation to be had about how Gilnean players weren't happy to retake the city from Deus Ex Crusade, or how WoW's narrative has to suffer from playable content needing to be available to both factions.
Sure.
We're just going to focus today on how Horde players felt during this questline. And
honestly, playable content between both factions, to me, the best they've ever done with it was Battle for Dazara Lore. I love that raid. And that raid was so well done, the way both sides could play it, the way you flip sides mid-raid. That was, to me, was like a shining example of how to make content available to both sides, but still keep it faction, keep the faction divide. That was a great raid. Probably the best thing that came out of BFA.
Gathered, the average Horde fan isn't pleased. I believe that when your entire identity is belonging to a faction of survival, going to help out your oppressors and apologize the entire time you do it can feel disempowering, which isn't the feeling you want if you picked Red Team at character select. So I think for future Horde stories, the Horde should still be pretty skeptical of the Alliance. And over the course of the next few years, while fighting mutual enemies, we can build a satisfying trust between the two factions.
Sure.
The most important factor is that this is done over time. Having a heel turn within an expansion or two invalidates the existence of the Horde.
Yeah.
I get that may sound like a retread, but so is a second Siege of Orgrimmar.
Personally, I hate time gating things, and I think time gating is a shit way to do things. But one of the issues with retaking of Gilneas was it was so quick. Like, storylines and relationships formed instantly. There was no, like, real background context to how they were getting along, or who was... Kalia just shows up all of a sudden. Gen hates the undead, but now he likes them, like, 1 second later because his daughter told him he should like them. There was a lot of, like, rushed content in that whole thing. And I think that's why a lot of people felt like, oh, my God, this questline wasn't that good. Yeah, time gating is garbage, though. I agree. Time gating is garbage, but I think there could have been just been a longer quest line. Could have been the story could have been told for a longer period of time.
BFA, we're basically back to square one of games.
More building up that relationship before we retook it.
I'm going to propose a rewrite of the Gilneas Reclamation, because this is our first real taste of a post BFA Horde. We can do this as a sort of
and another issue, Sigbreed, kind of what to you hint to, is there's a lot of storytelling, but a lot of it happens outside of the game. That's another issue that Warcraft has in general.
Size and how the core principles of the Horde can work under the restrictions we've been given. Those restrictions being that the Alliance and Horde need to work together, as Blizzard has limited resources to develop content, and we need all players to engage.
Right.
This does mean that the Scarlet Crusade is going to stay, and yes, I know, but I get why Blizzard pulled them out again for this.
The Scarlet Crusade.
An easy punching bag. But as the start of this rewrite, we're going to connect the Gilneas Reclamation to another recent questline, the Forsaken Heritage Quest. For those who missed out, the Scarlet Crusade also popped up near Lordaeron, and the Forsaken had to kick them out as part of getting their sick new drip. I think this gives us a good starting point to establish why the Horde is at Gilneas.
Agreed.
And also more firmly establishes why the Scarlets are in Gilneas to begin with. We can imagine that the Scarlets have been in Gilneas for some time, knowing that the Forsaken had pulled out and it took until recently for Gen to decide to go back. With them staging an attack on Lordaeron, perhaps Gilneas is their new stronghold of power that they had launched that assault from. After defending Lordaeron, the Horde Forsaken could have continued to push them back, all the way to their nest.
Right.
This gives a better motivation for the Forsaken to help with the reclamation, instead of solely being sad puppies, being really, really sorry for kicking them out in the first place. Remember, the Horde are the oppressed. They have more than enough reason to be soured towards the humans and their cushy castles.
Well, yeah, the Horde are the oppressed, but they're also the invaders, so there's, that. The Alliance was never really oppressing the Tauren. They never had a problem with them. The Orcs came along and tried to invade, and those attacks just started. The Alliance didn't even know who the Horde were, right? The Orcs just started showing up and destroying camps and invading, and that was because they had the blood of Manoroth running through their veins. They were all freaking blood raged and stuff, so they were just going off. So in terms of the Alliance are the oppressors, maybe they became oppressors after they defeated the Orcs, but remember, they lost to them. It wasn't until later wars that they ended up being able to recapture a lot of the lands that the Orcs had come and taken. Yeah. To be fair, the invasion was only done because Medivh and Gul'dan, yeah, they were definitely corrupted into invading. It was not like an orcish thing, and their lands were destroyed by the Burning Legion, by Gul'dan's what was it, fell fire magic and all that shit, dealing with the fell. There were a lot of corruption leading to the orc invasion. They were definitely brainwashed into doing it. But from an Alliance perspective, they didn't care about that or know that. They just knew that their lands were being destroyed and people were being killed.
Change in perspective, the Alliance and Horde could do the tried and true temporary truce and work together to spill some scarlet blood. With the Alliance regaining their city and the Forsaken getting revenge against those bigoted towards their people, a more natural appreciation between the forces could build over the course of its reclamation. Something that allows the Horde to work towards a new peaceful future without simply letting go of what makes them who they are. Real quick though, I want to make the disclaimer that I don't think I'm some sort of better writer or anything than Blizzard. I'm just a guy that makes a couple YouTube videos. I wanted to engage with the storyline in this way as an exercise to experiment with a different approach to modern day Horde storytelling, as I still think the most important Horde stories are still to be told. While the overall community likes to attack Blizzard's writing, I think it's important to recognize that between development pipelines and the myriad of other things that happen in the corporate
It's a tough
world,
job.
there's a lot that can get left between the lines, and hindsight is always 2020. So let's try to act respectful towards Blizzard's writers in the comment section. I get I'm hurting cats here, but let's give it a try. But to return to the matter at hand, as we move into future expansions that will more heavily involve the Horde, after a brief break of Shadowlands and Dragonflight, I think now is a good time for a bit of introspection on what we want to see out of the modern day Horde. It's important that we don't sand them down into just a red alliance.
Yeah,
Make sure
agreed.
we hold on to that grit and determination to eke out a future that makes them so appealing. I want to hear from you all in the comments. What draws you to the Horde? Is it the aesthetic? Do you relate to their themes? Or perhaps you want to revel in being seen as a bad guy? Let me know! I hope this video can spark discussion on where we want to see Azeroth's most complex faction go. But before we wrap this up, I need to thank my Patreons. Thank you to Marianne, whose transmog matches so well, I didn't even notice it's not a full set. Zik.exe, showing us what a peak mage looks like. Coda, a feral Vampira that I wouldn't want to cross. Thunderbolt 5891, who's just fiending to land
Great Death Knight
Strike.
transmog.
And Maria's Bomb, the most tree-loving night elf this side of the Maelstrom. Also, Pippiny Peanuts, if you're hearing this, reach out to me on Patreon so I can add your character. Anyways, this has been Six. Make sure to subscribe and click that notification bell. I'll see you guys next time.
Look, in terms of the Horde, right, I play Alliance. You guys know that. I play a human on the Alliance. It's the only thing I play. But in terms of the Horde, there are things that do appeal to me about them, and probably some of the best storytelling ever done in WoW when it comes to Horde and Alliance coming together and fighting side by side but maintaining their faction identity has to be the Wrathgate. The Wrathgate was one of the coolest moments in the game ever. It was one of those. It was the first cutscene, I believe, in game ever. And when it happened, it was such a cool moment because the Alliance was being alliance-y, with their, regalia, and everyone's lined up and doing their thing, and we're fighting. And then all of a sudden, at the very moment when things were going to end, bam, the Horde showed up, and they were just being the Horde, right? Orcish brood, Loktar Ogar running in, barbaric swinging axes and shit. They weren't all, perfectly organized like the Alliance was in that fight. They came in and did Horde shit, and that was like crushing skulls and swinging big axes. And that was badass. And I thought in that moment the Horde looked badass. That's the way to do it. Not to make the Horde, as he said, like a red alliance, but to keep the Horde's faction identity, to keep them cool, but then at the same time, hey, we can get together and kill a common enemy kind of thing. The Wrathgate. Hell yeah, brother. Yeah, no, that was a great thing. Wrathgate goes down as a goated moment in the game for sure.